In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, on the show this evening, we have Chris Wright. He's a filmmaker, a host of several podcasts, including the Bible Prophecy Talk, and he's a director of the Revelations Radio Network. You can find all of Chris's links and stuff at BibleProphecyTalk.com. Chris, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, John, for having me. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I usually start the interviews with asking people if they were raised in a religious environment. So that's kind of where I want to start with you, if that's okay.
Yes, I suppose I was. It was sort of nominal religious. I mean, nobody was all that serious about it. And so, yeah, I would say no. Probably in my I did kind of get into Bible prophecy even back then, though, just because I had sort of an interest in, I don't know, ancient texts and, I don't know, interesting things or whatever, which kind of, I guess, I mean, I did get, in my early 20s, I was really into a lot of things like, I don't know, I guess you could call them mystery school stuff. Like, I'm thinking like Manly P. Hall via Jordan Maxwell or Alice Bailey via David Icke, sort of like the secondhand stuff. And then also Zachariah Sitchin. I was really, so yeah, all that to say, not really. And I was really into that stuff. And so my sort of whole thing was, at some point I just kind of figured that I wanted to really show a lot of people that I felt like a lot of that stuff was factually inaccurate. And many years later when I kind of came to that conclusion. So I spent a lot of time making videos and stuff about that. One of the most probably well known is something called Ancient Aliens Debunked, which was a 3-hour film I did about debunking ancient aliens on the History Channel. And it's still out there if you go, well, it's super shadow banned, but you can go to ancientaliensdebunked.com and it's there for free. But yeah, I got into Bible prophecy sort of at the end of it, where it kind of started, I guess. And I've always felt, had I don't know how to say it, like a knack for it, I guess. But in listening to your podcast, I get the sense that you have the same kind of knack. In other words, if I asked you like about some ancient text or some weird thing, you'd probably get to the heart of it quicker than a lot of people would, or like see what's really behind the rhetoric in some senses. But anyway, I guess that's it.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a matter of having a broad base, and you can kind of connect dots easier or faster that way. You kind of see a pattern in things, perhaps.
I think it's that. I think it's certainly that. A little bit of, I think mostly it's a lot of common sense. In Bible prophecy, you have to, the main probably thing is not to have the commitment to fitting what one of my friends calls newspaper exegesis, which is, trying to look at whatever's happening in the world today and saying, let's make this fit. Because then you get into all kinds of problems. Where if you look at the history of Christianity and really, they were always trying to fit whatever it was into Bible prophecy. The Antichrist has gone through a list of, starting with Nero, then we go to Diocletian and down to Genghis Khan and Hitler and everybody else. You can read commentaries going all the way back to the beginning of like, if you take Nero's name in 666, right. I mean, we've always done it. Attila the Hun, he was a big one because he conquered Rome, And so it's been the history. Bible prophecy to me is, it's been saying the same thing the whole time. It's just not, I don't know how to say it. It's not as well. In one sense, it's more unbelievable. I think. I don't think people can see what the Bible is saying happening. Maybe it's that. I don't know. Anyway, I guess to sum up what I was trying to say, I think it's a lack of presuppositions, maybe, or maybe it's something like that. I don't know. I don't actually know the answer to that question.
So, would you say that you're kind of self-taught, or just doing a lot of this research on your own, because you have like an encyclopedic knowledge of this kind of stuff? And listening to your podcast, I get kind of blown away sometimes with the depth of your knowledge on the topic.
Well, thanks. I think, I am, I guess, self-taught. You could say ordination, but ordination in Christendom is really not much of anything. I am ordained, but basically that equals self-taught as well. So yeah, I went through a period of time, like kind of, as I mentioned, sort of when I was sort of making the transition from the New Age kind of world to the Christian world, where for me, it was audio. I listened to stuff basically constantly for 10 years. So yeah, I think that's probably where it came from.
Okay. So, we're going to wade deeper into the topic here, but before we do, I just want to make sure that I'm clear on something, because I'm sure this is going to come up. It seems to be like important topic for you. And that's this differentiation between pre-wrath and post-wrath. And I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. Pre-wrath is when rapture takes place before this tribulation, and post-wrath is like this resurrection and rapture happening at the same time after or during the tribulation. Do I get a handle on that?
Pretty close. The terms are the main term. Probably the vast majority of sort of evangelical Christendom believes in something called pre-trib, which is the belief that the resurrection of the dead, otherwise known as the rapture, happens before anything bad happens. In fact, just before anything bad happens. And then pre-wrath is the idea that it's all played out in this, if you will, a 7-year time frame, commonly referred to as the 70th week of Daniel, because where it was first introduced in Daniel 9. So pre-wrath believes that the rapture will happen, the resurrection of the dead will happen as described, but only after certain precursors, notably the midpoint, the abomination of desolation, which is a time in which the Antichrist begins to kill people. It's the greatest persecution of all time. It's described as in several places. Anyway, so pre-wrath believes that, yeah, the rapture is going to happen, but it's not without a great deal of persecution and so on beforehand. So that's basically the distinction. There are certainly a lot of nuances.
Yeah, I get that. Listen, and it's hard to kind of parse it out from the outside. Like, what is like when he talks about like the people that believe it takes place like in like one of the nooks and crannies between the lines or something.
Right.
So can you tell us about the pre-wrath movie that you're working on?
Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. You did it. It's a pre-wrath movie. I am working on it. It'll be a while till it's out. I've got a lot of work to do on it, but there has been a lot of people helping, and it's really, I think, going to be the best production that I've ever done, which isn't saying a whole lot, but yeah, I'm excited about it.
That's cool. Like, I saw on your website that you mentioned the Ancient Aliens thing, but I didn't put it together that you are the guy that did the debunking Ancient Aliens documentary. I remember watching that, like, when Ancient Aliens first became real big, like in the first season. I remember actually watching that movie. I just now kind of put together that you're that guy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I really had fun with that. And well, actually, no, I didn't. Now that thinking back in the actual production of it, it was so grueling to go through that much footage of Ancient Aliens. I mean, those guys are really sneaky about how they present stuff in such a really finely edited way. It was somewhat aggravating, really.
So, okay, a little bit about me. I was raised in a broken home. My dad was a Catholic, non-practicing, but my mom was a Southern Baptist. And So when I was with her, I was going to Southern Baptist churches, and it can get real hellfire and brimstone
Yeah.
on some Sundays. So I've always been aware of end time prophecy. And on the show recently, well, a few years ago, my ears kind of perked up when everyone was talking about the Revelation 12 sign and the sign of Jonah business, the constellations and all that stuff. I'm sure you're aware. We're all over that.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on those things?
I honestly don't know what to make of it. What I will say is that same basic kind of a lot of those same elements, you can actually trace back, and Dr. Michael Heiser did something on this a while back, in that you can actually show most of those same elements occurring. I think it was like 2 or 3 years in the springtime after 2000 or 0 AD, basically. Just FYI, nobody in real Christianity actually thinks that Jesus was born on December 25th or whatever. I mean, everybody knows that he wasn't. The Bible certainly doesn't say that. In fact, the Bible seems to make an allusion to him being born in the springtime, since there were some shepherds and some other things, some clues. Anyway, Heiser goes through a lot of that stuff, but all that to say that he goes through essentially what you would look at as the same presentation for this, that people are, the star and going through the Virgo and the womb and all this stuff, excuse me, happened essentially probably right around the time of Jesus's probable real birth, which is of course interesting because of the Magi who followed a star to the place of Jesus's birth. And there's a lot of interesting things that go on with that. But to answer the question, I don't know. I don't know if it was supposed to start something. And I mentioned all the stuff previously to that because I think more often than not, the Bible says that the stars are there. They were created for signs. Mm-hmm. In other words, they are, what that was the purpose of them. So, or one of the purposes anyhow. All that to say that it's possible that what you could essentially be seeing is like a rerun or, a shadow of what was originally supposed to happen at Christ's birth. But at the same time, I think the answer is I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I'm just asking for your opinion. I'm not trying to get you on record to or anything like that. So, okay, so some folks are looking around with this pandemic thing that's going on, and they're like, some people are just straight up convinced of it. And at the time of recording, we're still pretty on lockdown. Everyone's talking about letting it up right now, but no one's actually done anything. So these people that are like, this is it, bro. Like, this is when it's going to happen. And they are not alone. On April 7th, I found this article on lifewayresearch.com. Are you familiar with that website?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, well, no, I guess not. I'm familiar with Lifeway, but I'm guessing it's not that. So okay. Go ahead. I'll look at it.
It's lifewayresearch.com. They posted an article by this guy named Aaron Earls, and it's called Vast Majority of Pastors See the Sign of End Times in Current Events. So before I go any further, I'm like, is that what you're seeing on your end? What do you think about that?
I don't see it, and this is part of what Christians have been doing since the beginning is forcing. If you want to know what they're seeing, and if you go through all these, and it's certainly not just these guys, it's a lot of guys. It's the mention of famine in Matthew 24. Yep. Yeah. And or excuse me, pestilence. It's sort of connected there. Pestilence, the pale horse, etc. And this is the thing about those signs and what's known as the Olivet Discourse are not just in Matthew 24. It's in Luke 21 and Mark 13 as well. But the idea is that these are when the disciples first asked Jesus, hey, what's going to be the signs of your return? Can you give us like a rundown of what this is going to look like? Mm-hmm. And he starts off by saying, watch out that no one misleads you, for there will come in my name saying, I am the Christ. They will mislead many. You will hear of wars, rumors of wars. Make sure you're not alarmed. Goes on and says, for nation will rise up in arms against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There's going to be famines and earthquakes in various places. Now, these are what are known theologically as the birth pangs. Some people call them different things. But these signs, there's a fair split in Christianity about when do these signs happen in relationship to, again, that 7-year period that I talked about, because that's really what the question is. And I think you probably have about a 50-50 split with the newspaper exegetes, if you will, really wanting that to be.
Can
go ahead.
I just want to pump the brakes just a little bit, because we're going to get into the timeline here, but just, you said 50-50. Let me just tell you the percentages of what some of these preachers are saying on these things that you're talking about. So the question was, are any of these types of events the birth pains that Jesus was referring to? Now, I didn't get into the data and the metrics of it, so I'm just taking this article at face value. The rise and fall of prophets and teachings. 83% of the pastors that were polled agree. Okay, loved ones, the love of believers growing cold. 81% of pastors agree. Traditional morals becoming less accepted. 79%. Is that stunning to you?
It's not, but I always like to try to put this in perspective for people, because it's a little bit of that get off my lawn syndrome, this generation and never not doing nothing, whatever. But we fail to remember that the generations before us were way worse in every possible conceivable way. And if we think that morality was bad now, how about when people were literally putting babies on the flaming hands of Moloch so they would flame to death? And then you would say, hey, these kids today with their burning, famines. Let's talk about famines. The potato famine for one modern history was so devastating. Anyway, I mean, that seems obvious, but it is shocking to me, to answer the question, that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Where are you going with it? Or
so I was just going to continue. So wars and conflicts, 78% of the pastors agree. This one was very interesting to me. I actually, after the first 4, I thought that this one was going to be a little bit higher. Earthquakes and natural disasters, that's just a meager 76% of pastors agree that that's a birth pain. People abandoning the faith, 75% agree. And then the famine that you were just talking about, only 70% agree that a famine in our, the modern, I like your term, the newspaper exegesis, 70%. And then the rise of, or the continuing rise or the return of anti-Semitism is at a 63%.
Well, right. And so I guess to this, I would really try to show the difference here. So those that believe that these signs, this is essentially the difference. They believe that these birth pang signs, wars, rumors of wars, famine, pestilence, etc., false Christs, these are what they would say have been occurring for 2,000 years. But they would say they are increasing in intensity over time. Okay, so that's one camp. That these birth pangs have been increasing in intensity over time. So in their understanding of this, they have to start small and get worse, okay, for that to make sense. The other end of the spectrum believes that these signs that Jesus started to say, here are the signs, are all part of, or very, very close to the beginning of this 7-year period, which every side agrees that it's all, that 7-year period, the 7-year period situation is what it's all really going to be centered around. But the other side says, no, we don't need to go looking for any old pestilence or any old false Christ or any old earthquake. These are things that you are not going to miss. And one of the strongest, I mean, I can go into why they believe that, but all that to say that that's really the two camps. And I feel that when you ask, the people that are teaching this, and I would say, I'm not saying that they're bad people or whatever. I think that this is true, not just with Christendom, but everybody kind of wants there to be something strange and interesting and exciting and whatever happening in their time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wants it a little bit. And again, I do think it's a little bit of that get off my lawn syndrome. And also, that in terms of, and I was thinking about this today, or no, it was the other day, but I was thinking about, oh man, the world's just going whatever, and then I was thinking, what would I say if I was in the middle of World War II, would I still be like, darn it, these times today are just a little too bad, it's less, and again, I would say that I could go into why each side believes what they do, but I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. So, I want you to go into that, but before you say that, like, like there was a time, like I was in middle school when the Challenger exploded, and I remember watching it being like, this is the craziest thing I'm ever going to see in my lifetime. I don't even think it's in the top 10 anymore. Like, So go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's funny. That's one of my first memories about being young is that as well. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. All right. So can you explain why the sides
Well, I think that the primary thing is, first of all, just contextually, it seems to make sense. Jesus he ends that whole birth pang sign by saying, let's see here, nation of kingdom against kingdom, there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of birth pangs. So in a way, he says these things are just the beginning. But his next thing that he goes into is the persecution of being killed. He goes into a lot of detail about how everybody's going to literally hate you. And it's not even just a mild hate. He goes into a lot of detail about this hate. In fact, it's one of the more striking warnings he gives. He talks about the level of hate is such that, like, mothers will turn in their children and say, look, he's one of them. Go get him right there. But it's all in the context because he says it starting in verse 15 of Matthew 24. So when you see the abomination of desolation, which is a definite callback to Daniel, who used that exact phrase, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he finishes saying that. And then he goes on to talk about something that everybody knows happens in the middle of that 70th week of Daniel. So it seems to make sense just contextually first that the signs that he mentioned first also are pre that first half of that midpoint. If he then starts talking about the abomination of desolation, which everybody knows is at the middle of that 7-year period, it's very likely that the first things he said were at the beginning. But even more, and there's two main things I would try to appeal to somebody that believed that those things were, whatever. We could believe that. I should back up and say, when these people say, this earthquake, they look on the news and they say, wow, an earthquake has happened. There you go. That's proof that the Bible is true or whatever. That is something that even they would, at least the good ones would admit, is not really a sign. They would admit that's just one of the many things that have been going over the last 2,000 years. Again, for them to actually say what is happening now has any real relevance, and they really do. If you get down to brass tacks with them, they'll say, well, no, it really doesn't mean anything, because there's no way you could tell that earthquake is what. And of course, you get into the wars and rumors of wars, and it doesn't follow their intensity guideline, which all has to be going up in intensity. Anyway, the two ways I would try to prove this to somebody besides context is the parable of the fig tree. As soon as Jesus gets done describing these signs, literally from verse 4 to probably verse 31, he finishes up with the signs. And that last sign is the rapture. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet blast, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, etc. So then he says this: learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, know that he is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now, back in the day, like the 70s, during the Jesus movement and Hal Lindsey and stuff, Hal Lindsey really ruined, I call it the Hal Lindsey hangover, because we're still dealing with all the bad stuff that he said. And one of the things that he said was that this fig tree parable meant that we were all in the last generation, and it was going to be 30 years from some time that he picked until 40, I think it was 48 or 67, one of those. Anyway, long story short, it was supposed to be 1988. But what this is almost directly saying is that in the same way that you can tell that summer is near when you see, by judging the leaves on a fig tree. You can say, this is about to be summer. Look at this fig tree. He says, you can also know that my return is near, because the generation that sees all these signs will see the conclusion of it. In other words, it seems pretty straightforward that he's saying all the things that I just got done mentioning here, from the moment you asked me to this conclusion, you're going to see all these things in the same time period, not over 2,000 years. And you get to be the judge of it because they're so general. But here is the real reason I think that this is an absolute lock, that it has to be, these signs are, and I should kind of back up, because there's a logical progression to these signs that is all about how Daniel tells us the end times are going to play out. Long story short, the Antichrist shows up. He starts warring. People love the Antichrist because of his war-making ability. They say, who is like the beast? Who can make war with him? He has what Daniel calls a god of fortresses, a martial, if you will, god of some sort, that empowers him supernaturally to make war and to win at war. Nobody is able to stand against him. And in fact, it tells you in Daniel 11 which countries he's conquering. He takes their gold. He takes Egypt's gold. He marches all the way up to Israel. And it's these if you look at the logical progression of what Jesus is saying and what everybody actually knows is supposed to happen in the 70th week of Daniel, which is the Antichrist shows up, he fights wars, he then starts a persecution and a death spiral that ends up. So anyway, I got off the track, but I want to take you to Revelation chapter 6, which is an even pre-tribbers recognize this parallel, or some of them, like John MacArthur does. Not all of them do, but they don't really have a good, well, they do have a good reason if they look too deep into it. But anyway, on the face of it, there's no reason why they shouldn't understand this parallel, because it is so obvious, which is the seals in the book of Revelation. So in the book of Revelation, there is a scroll with 7 seals on the outside of it. Each one of those seals has a corresponding event. The first 4 seals are the riders of the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And every single one of those events in Revelation chapter 6, John, the writer of Revelation, and including Revelation chapter 6, recognized that Jesus' one teaching, really broad teaching on the end times, was what we just read in Matthew 24. That's basically his main teaching on the end times. And the seals are the exact mirror of that. It's a parallel, ending with the exact same sign, which is this moon turning in blood red and the stars falling from heaven and the sun becoming black as sackcloth. Anyway, so first seal, for example, is a rider on a white horse. And he had a bow, given a crown, and he rides out conquering and to conquer. That is, I would say, almost universally, not quite universally, understood to be the Antichrist for a number of sort of nuanced reasons. But it's a fairly orthodox interpretation that that's the Antichrist. And it also happens to be the very first thing that Jesus says in the birth pangs, which is false Christ. That's the first thing to watch for, according to Jesus. He goes on the next seal. I heard the second living creature say, come, and another horse, fiery red, came out. The one who rode it was granted permission to take peace from the earth, so that he would they would butcher one another, and he was given a huge sword. Which again, not only lines up with Jesus's next thing, which is to say there will be wars and rumors of wars, but it also lines up with Daniel, which is the Antichrist is introduced. He immediately begins this war path to conquer people. In other words, before the Antichrist it's kind of like his early days. It's sort of like before he's the real Antichrist, he's a war maker. I know that flies contrary to this idea, again, Hal Lindsey hangover, that it's this peacemaker or whatever. He does make it something. I don't know if you call it a peace agreement. It's a covenant with many, which I have my own theories about. Anyway, continuing, third seal, living black horse, the one who had balance in his hand. Next thing Jesus says, famine. Anyway, pestilence, next horse, pestilence. And then, of course, the big one, which is the abomination of desolation, which is the greatest slaughter of Christians of all time, which, of course, ends with, the fifth seal in the book of Revelation is, I saw those who had been violently killed because of the word of God and their testimony they had given. Anyway, you've got martyrs. We'll just call it the seal of martyrs. Okay. And then let me finish with this last one, because it's sort of the key. All right. Is the sixth seal is I looked, and the Lamb opened the sixth seal, and a huge earthquake took place. Again, earthquakes. The sun became as black as sackcloth made of hair. The moon is blood red, and the stars fell from earth. And then that lines up with the next thing, which is immediately after the suffering of those days, which days? The days of persecution after the midpoint. Immediately after the suffering of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Earthquake. So it's a mirror image. And if you take all that together and say, if this is in fact a mirror image, if Jesus's entire timeline in the Olivet Discourse is a mirror image of the first seven, or all the seven seals, then you must say that those things, for example, the wars and rumors of wars aren't any wars and rumors of wars. It's wars that are perpetuated by the rise of the Antichrist, who will apparently be awesome at it. So it's not any famine. It's a famine that results probably as a result of those wars. It's not any persecution. It's the persecution described in Daniel and Matthew and Revelation. It's the greatest persecution of all time, not a general one. The earthquake isn't, and the sun becoming blood moon is not your average eclipse. It's the sign spoken of by Joel 2, the herald of the day of the Lord. It's not your average blood moon. So this whole thing is like something that people have a hard time saying, this is something that we're going to see in the future. And no, not all the elements are there for this to happen. And that's okay. We don't have to make it be. Anyway.
Yeah. So, well, hey, I just want to remind you about the Easter sermon. It's available on my Patreon and my Subscribestar feed. It's free to everybody. You don't have to be a supporter of the show to get access to it. Just scroll down past a couple of the archive episodes and you'll find a post that's unlocked for everybody. It's called The Easter Sermon in Quarantine, the Psychological Crisis of Jesus Christ. And it was something a little bit different, and I think it was fun. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from it. So if you want a little bit more of the Advercast, it's a good place to go. Again, it's at the Advercast, on the Advercast Patreon or Subscribestar feeds.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
I guess that's it.
Just from my point of view, like, that's a lot to take in. So I want to unpack some things. Like, okay, now you have to please forgive me. I'm coming in from like a layman's standpoint here, sort of like a layman's standpoint. So the abomination of desolation, I remember reading about this and, when I was younger or whatever, I could not wrap my head around it because I thought it was like a thing. Like, I thought it was like a physical, like, object. It's, to me, like, I got a comic book brain. So, like, the abomination of desolation is some kind of, like, machine or like a death ray or something like that. But, nowadays I understand that it's more of like a monstrous act of desolation or of devastation. It's the way that you kind of describe it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like, this is the persecution. This is like the culling. Like, this is rounding people up and putting them to the sword. Is that correct?
Right. I get you. So yeah, that's the logical outcome of the abomination of desolation. What happens at the abomination of desolation? And Daniel goes through this a lot. That's why Jesus refers to him directly when he cites the abomination of desolation. Daniel gives a picture of what it looked like in his day. But we know it wasn't fulfilled in his day completely, because Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is a common thing that you do see other places in the Bible too. You see like a sort of half fulfilled something with Cyrus or somebody that was fully fulfilled in another place. It's a somewhat common thing. But in any case, so Daniel gives us this picture of Antiochus, who, what he did was, he was a Syrian king that sacrificed a pig. Jewish people do not take kindly to pigs, let alone being sacrificed on their altar in the temple in Jerusalem. He then declared, in a sort of roundabout way, Antiochus sort of declared himself to be a deity. But what we can see in the a New Testament is a much clearer picture of what happens. The Antichrist, it says he sits in the temple as God, declaring himself that he is God. Now, so that's the abomination of desolation, a very specific act of the Antichrist sitting in the temple as if he is God, declaring that he's God. And it's actually as a result of this declaration of deity that everybody essentially, he apparently makes some kind of call to then begin killing those that don't agree with this. So the call goes out after the abomination of desolation to begin the persecution. So they're connected, but they're not the same. My understanding of the abomination of desolation, and this is where I take a somewhat niche view of it. A lot of people look at, again, people want to make the Antichrist be whatever the big baddie of the day is. And right now, the big baddie since 9/11 has been the Islamic people. And so the Antichrist is Islamic in a lot of circles today. And that really doesn't fit with a guy declaring himself to be God in the temple. But what I do think is happening there is that in the real understanding of what will seriously happen in the end is that a return Jesus, you could read this in the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, the last bit of Revelation, lots of places in the Bible, actually, pictures in Isaiah of the millennial kingdom, a picture with, if you will, heaven on earth. And during that time, Jesus really is sitting in the temple. He has people it's a real millennial picture. So in other words, what I interpret the Antichrist doing here is he's sitting in the temple saying, I have returned. I am here. Begin the worship of me. I am God. And so it's a little more, I think the reason that Christians need to be careful with a lot of their sort of newspaper exegesis is because I don't think that they're giving Satan enough credit. He's a really smart guy. And I think that, or whatever he is, cherub, I guess, but he's trickier than they think. And I think this kind of deception of I'm the returned Christ, come worship me, is going to be a lot more deceptive to Christians than they think it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, are you troubled with the way that I see it is it seems like there's a big movement to take the supernatural or the occult-ish kind of stuff out of the Bible, making this more of a parable or more of a myth. Now, I know that that's not the way that you look at it. I believe that's not the way that you look at it. Are you troubled by this kind of move to demystify some of this stuff?
Sure. Yeah, but it's been going on forever. I mean, Thomas Jefferson's, Jefferson Bible basically was the Bible minus any kind of supernatural things. And that goes certainly with I think it's the most interesting part of the Bible. I mean, Genesis 6 and the angels and the whatever is going on. I mean, trying to parse all that out is one of my favorite things to do. But yes, like a lot of, criticism in the scholarly world basically is, if you get down to the details in it, they'll say, we've written a paper showing that Daniel didn't really write Daniel. It was some random guy. And you look at their argument, and their argument is as simple as, well, Daniel talks about prophecies that we know that came true later on. And since we know that prophecies aren't real, then this must have been written by some other guy, and it's all like that. We know that Exodus, it wasn't written by Moses because there's supernatural stuff in it. So therefore, it was somebody else. So that sounds simplistic, but that's just that's been going on for a long time. But I do feel that that was actually, I was criticized a lot in the Ancient Aliens, debunked thing, because the first, 2 3/4 hours of that, it was pretty standard sort of scientific. This is wrong because of this, and this is wrong because of that. But that last part, when we got to the, how do you explain all these ancient civilizations saying that these angels came down and had sex with women and produced offspring and all that stuff? And I was like, I don't see a logical way around that. I don't see a scientific way around that. That happened. Something very close to it happened anyway.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's always been a thing.
Yeah. So like when I think of Revelation specific, now I have to admit that I'm an Old Testament dude. Since my days at the New Life Baptist Church in Elyria, Ohio. But when I listen to you, passionately talk about this stuff. And I put it in my brain like, okay, well, this guy is going to get this mortal head wound and the whole world's going to be able to see it. And then when he recovers from it, everyone's going to be like, whoa, that's the dude we got to worship or whatever. And I'm like, we're so many years like into this thing and everybody should know this story. Like, how are we still going to be hoodwinked? And that's kind of why I asked you about, this idea of like taking the miracles and the supernatural business out, because I can't see where something like that would happen and everyone would see it like on the World Wide Web or on Twitter or Facebook nowadays and be like, okay, well, it's still cool to worship that dude.
Right.
It seems like it would be like a gigantic red flag for like half of the world.
That's incredibly insightful, because I think that's where I think a lot of people do kind of come up with their other theories. And part of it is because they've never really heard the basic idea, which is the Antichrist is a false Christ. He is everything that he's doing looks like a guy who's saying that, hey, I am either Jesus or I am the real Christ, something like that, something that Christians can get a hold of, something that they can understand. But at the same time, there is going to be a lot of what you just talked about with sort of the minimalization of what the Bible says. So there has to be, obviously he's not going to actually be able to do the real things that Jesus is going to be able to do. In fact, here's a good example of that. So in the real millennium, Jesus actually sits in the temple, presumably able to do a lot of things, including sitting in the temple while he does other things. I mean, he can do what he wants. But the Antichrist, who is, of course, limited, can't do that. And I believe that's why he creates this thing called the image of the beast. The image of the beast stays in the temple as if it is fulfilling this prophecy of Jesus having been returned. Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation, chapters 17 and 18, that is the picture of a world that is bringing gifts to this city, to the temple. Gold, silver, precious stones, all the stuff talked about in Daniel, all the stuff talked about in Isaiah, the stuff that's really going to happen when the real Christ returns. This world is as it says in Mystery Babylon, it's drunk on the idea of promoting the Antichrist. I don't want to get into so much of the weeds here. In fact, I completely forgot the question. So yeah, okay.
So the other thing, I'm still kind of trying to catch up from your timeline business. So when you were going through that and you were matching it up with the scroll with the 7 seals to the birth pains, I thought it was interesting, and I never really thought of this before, but like I'm into like Jungian art types and stuff. So when you hear that the rider on the white horse is going to be the Antichrist, and then you think like, well, usually dudes on the white horse are like the heroes, and his whole shtick is to like be this false kind of Christ figure. I thought that was exactly that was interesting.
And one of the points I've been trying to get people to realize, and first of all, that's absolutely dead on. I mean, he's a rider on the white horse, but you can, again, there's a whole study there why people come to the conclusion that this seemingly good guy is actually the Antichrist. But if you parse the wars, I think this is an incredibly important part of Daniel chapter 11, starting at verse 40. And it's true that Daniel 11 kind of fades in from Antiochus into stuff that obviously has to be the Antichrist in some time that has not happened yet. And by 40, you're well into Antichrist territory, where this is just something that hasn't happened yet. And it's a thing that, I won't go into that. But it goes through all the wars that he fights. And he fights a bunch of wars, invades lands, passing through them. Then he will enter the beautiful. So he conquers places like Egypt. He conquers places like Edom, Moab, the Ammonite kingdom, but apparently they escape. Libyans, Ethiopians. In other words, he is conquering unambiguously the enemies of Israel. He is not conquering Israel. He's not conquering anybody else. What he uses his great, mighty power to do is to fulfill the very prophecy that the Messiah is supposed to fill, which is to deliver Israel from its enemies.
Okay.
He is what he is, the picture that we see as him starting this, making a covenant with many, this beginning of the 7-year period. What he's actually doing is he now has protected for the first time by them sort of hitching their wagon to this guy who cannot be defeated in battle, has some sort of ability. I mean, we obviously haven't conceived yet. It's something that nuclear weapons mean nothing to him somehow. He's got some tool or something, but he uses it to presumably protect Israel from its enemies. His first order of business once he enters the beautiful land is to make this covenant, and we can make an inference of what that covenant is. He says, make a covenant with many. The nuance there in the Hebrew is that he makes firm an existing covenant. And what we see the outgrowth of that covenant is because by the midpoint, the daily sacrifices have begun again. Right now, the main thing that Jewish people would love to do is to rebuild the temple and start the daily sacrifices. Right now, their religion is null and void until that temple is rebuilt. There is no forgiveness of sins without the Day of Atonement. Yes, there's some things you can do, but by the letter of the book, they need the temple there. They need the sacrifices. But of course, there's all these political things, and it really comes down to fear of destruction is the reason why they can't do that. So it's the power of his warfare, the protection by hitching their wagon to him and saying, you are a protector. And that's really what we see with Mystery Babylon is this we have a king, we no longer need a husband. It's this, the world is made drunk by the fierceness of her fornication. What that means is the world is intoxicated by how fervently she worships him. And it's by her fervent worship that they are drawn in to this guy. He is a protector of Israel. He has started the sacrifices. He's sitting in the temple of the Messiah. He's saying that he's God, just like the Messiah. Jesus said, don't be deceived. Talking about the false Christ, this first guy. So yeah, we're all in a big trouble. And now, on the one hand, a huge portion of the world isn't going to fall for this anyway. You're telling me some guy. That's what I think gets people like, okay, so you're telling me that your average atheist is going to fall for this guy claiming that he's a Jewish Messiah. Sure, he can do some nice tricks. Sure, he's really good at warfare. Sure, he raised from the dead. His mortal wound was healed or whatever. But I'm still not buying it because that's not my thing. And no amount of this is going to be my thing. And it's interesting that the Bible makes a distinction between those who are enthralled with him. They love his words. He's good at speaking. They love the fact that he rose from the dead. They love the fact that who can make war with him. There's this group of people that are just all in Mystery Babylon. And then there's the other group who is in because of something that the false prophet does, which is institute the mark of the beast. They are more of the go along to get along folks who you got to serve somebody, as Bob Dylan once said, and they choose to get the mark and to essentially serve him.
Yeah. So okay, let me see where do I need to go? The only thing, if we're talking, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, I'm just saying, like, if we're talking about the end times happening within our lifetime, not Hal Lindsey's lifetime, the only way that I could see this is like the fake news meme, right? Like, you could show someone something and they could just be like, that doesn't mean anything to me because it's fake news, or, that was photoshopped, or that's like a GIF on the internet or something like that. That's the only way it kind of makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Walk me through say that again.
So, okay. So we'll just take something obvious, like, the guy got a mortal head wound and then recovered. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I could think of is, like, if I recall, I see.
So I don't believe it because it could be deep fake or something.
Yeah. Like, the only way that I could see it where the whole world could rejoice at the same time of seeing it would be like through the internet. So like,
right. Well, the context, I believe, is first of all going to be unmistakable. Again, if we just take these birth pangs, and if these birth pangs are, as I suspect, happening as the Antichrist first comes on the scene, then these things are going to happen. If we just take that as a guidepost, and we take and plug in things like Daniel and other places where we can see the early part of his rise to power, is that it's unmistakable. You have a geopolitical situation that is rocked to its core. If for no other reason but because of these wars. That's not something you can fake. That's going to be on Twitter if Twitter is around. And, there's going to be no deep faking a complete destruction of Egypt. And then also, and I believe that the mortal wound thing happens as he essentially right outside of Israel, just some things in Daniel 11, you can make actually, I think it's right at the end of Daniel 11 chapter, verse 45. Anyway, all that to say, that doesn't happen until right before his resurrection or seeming resurrection, or however you want to parse it. It doesn't happen until right at the beginning of that 70th week of Daniel. In any case, I think that the thing we have to remember is that we're dealing with a world that's gone through apparently some kind of famine, a penny for or however they describe it. Basically, wheat is incredibly scarce. A pestilence is something has happened with that. It's a war-torn, famine-drenched, pestilent. Probably, I think that's why pestilence comes after famine, is because of the probably health effects of famine. In any case, whatever, the world is rocked by this whole situation, and it's like any other rise of a dictator. There is a pattern. You got the Treaty of Versailles before you got your Hitler,
right?
And you need a downtrodden world. And once you got that, you've got a world that's willing to do something that maybe they weren't willing to do if times were all good.
Yeah, your view of it is way more depressing than my view of it. So this is one of the things that I thought was brilliant about your presentation on your podcast, is your adherence to this timeline that we're talking about. So, like I said, I was kind of raised in this hellfire and brimstone sort of thing. So I remember being like, Ronald Reagan is 666. That equals the devil. And credit cards are the mark of the beast. I remember this kind of being raised in this environment. So, and also, what struck me was the first time I watched Ghostbusters, and they're talking about the moon became black as sackcloth, and I was like, wait, no, all this stuff should take place before this other stuff. It doesn't make sense. So, when I was listening to your podcast and you started breaking down this, no, you have to adhere to this timeline that we were talking about, I was like, okay, well, that's brilliant. And the way that you had brought it up as a topic on your show was talking about the pandemic, right?
Right. Yeah, because there's all kinds of, especially Mark of the Beast talk is big right now because of all the stuff going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, can we walk through some of these things?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't know. Do you want to go ahead or?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, Mark of the Beast talk is big right now. If Mark of the Beast was a stock, it would be Ryzen because, obviously the pandemic thing, I get the impression you're probably a New World Order exists and they're out to do nefarious things. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's right. I'm just right of Ronald Reagan. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, and I think for most, what I'm about to say that I am not cool with, I say that coming from my libertarian perspective. That's my most outrage is because of that, and very little has anything to do with the Bible, but I'll kind of walk through that. But yeah, so we've got this being New World Order super shopping spree kind of situation, because you've got a world event. First of all, I mean, this isn't a localized thing. This is something that whatever the solution to this situation is, it's going to be a worldwide solution. So, and I tend to even accept sort of the, okay, maybe there are globalists and maybe, yes, they want absolute power and they want to track everything. And maybe there isn't something deep and dark and behind that. But yeah, people that want power just want power, hence the New World Order. And people like, your Kissingers and I said something recently, Gordon Brown or whatever, those guys are just maybe it's not a big cabal or anything, but whatever. This situation with the virus situation is perfect for that. Number one, because the solutions are so perfect, because you've got whether it's like the Bill Gates AMA, where he said that basically people are going to need a digital certificate of some kind showing that they either got the vaccine or that they got the antibody test. Basically, it's a papers, please situation.
Right.
And then you've got your situation. Of course, vaccine stuff could go a lot of different ways. And then microchip talk. But really, the things they're proposing right now, I'm watching. Have you ever seen what's his name? New World next week. James Corbett. He does some really good stuff, and I loved his take on this, on the New World Order, all the things that's advancing the New World Order's agenda. What they're saying, because they are saying, hey, I know what we should do. I got the solution to the coronavirus. Let's have a super world government.
Yeah.
And they're just like really happy about it. But then you've got the app thing kind of taking this digital idea of Gates, and basically they're already rolling out the app with the social score and whatever in China. But now it's tied to the COVID-19 thing where like you've got green. I haven't been next to any baddies or whatever, so I'm green. I can go in here or whatever. So anyway, from the Christian sort of freak out perspective, this is what again, we've always done with the mark of the beast, which is to say that anything that says, because one of the things that the mark of the beast says is that you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast. That's not by any means the only thing it says about the mark of the beast. It also says that the false prophet will be the one that institutes it. It says that it will be in your right hand or forehead. And it says that basically there's some other things we could go into, but one of those things is you can't buy or sell. So from time immemorial, not really. So let's take it back to Hal Lindsey again. It was the cashless society situation. That was his buzzword. When they're going to move to cashless society, that's going to be the mark of the beast. But all that really was, we got that now. It's on our debit cards. Cashless society has nothing to do with the mark of the beast. It's just, that could be just, you can't buy or sell unless you have money. So, it doesn't really go that far if you just take that one piece of criteria. It also has to have whatever the number of the beast name is, has to be 666 and all this stuff. But the problem with 666, of course, is that there has never been a thing that Christians are not going to say has 666 in it. Give them the opportunity and enough time, and they will make anything be 666. So that's one thing too.
Yeah, they could jam it into anything.
But my thesis on the mark of the beast is, first of all, as a libertarian, I think this is the worst possible situation ever. I think that the idea of giving these people who are clearly really want power that much information on every single person, anything that you get to say, hey, every single person do X. And then they want X to be like, oh, give us like all this biometric data. And look at the whole lot. X is now this huge long list of stuff that you would never give anybody, And all of a sudden they need not just everybody in your country, everybody in the world to do it. So even if this whole thing wasn't a big plandemic, it certainly is being capitalized on. So as a libertarian, I think it's terrible and I don't think it has anything to do with the mark of the beast, simply because that's not what the Bible says the mark of the beast is. People get the mark of the beast in relationship, and I talk about this in the podcast about it and going through a lot of the details, but they get it in relationship to particularly the persecution that follows the abomination of desolation. It's almost a way to ostracize those that he has now deemed as the wrong ones, those that we now kill. Because they won't get the mark of the beast. It's a way to very quickly single them out in order to kill them. And that's why a lot of people end up going along to get along. I think that's part of what Jesus says is in the end times, and Paul says this too in 2 Thessalonians 2, there's going to be some kind of apostasy in the end Christendom. And I think part of that is people wanting to disassociate themselves with those that the mothers are turning in their children and saying, hey, look, he's one of those crazy guys. Because you know how propaganda is. They can whip up hate for anybody really, really quickly. And when he's apparently good at doing that. So he makes people hate these people. So the mark of the beast is to disassociate yourself from them. It's a carrot and the stick thing. A, we're not going to kill you like we're going to kill them. And B, you get to be a part of the system and look at all this wonderful stuff. You get to buy and sell in addition to living this, what they're going to call a utopia, what they're going to call the new, Fourth Reich or whatever. Not that I don't think it's going to have anything to do with Nazism, but it might. I don't know. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's interesting. And the one thing that I thought was, not the one thing, but one of the things I thought was brilliant on your podcast about the mark of the beast was you were like, well, it could be debit cards, but then if you trace it back, like, how can you buy and sell without, dollar bills? Like, that's how long these things have been kind of boiling up, behind there. And maybe it's just like a stepping stone thing. Like maybe the introduction to paper money was like, one day we're going to be able to put microchips in these people, in their foreheads or whatever. And
and I need to be careful with that because I do allow for this to be a stepping stone. And sure, if all this stuff that I've been talking about starts to happening before they want to do this digital dollar or wherever they go, then it'll probably be the mark of the beast. All of a sudden they want to put it in my right hand or forehead and it's some guy called the false prophet or pretending to be Elijah calling fire down from heaven. If he's the one making this thing available, then it's probably the mark of the beast. But in light of none of that, so in other words, I'm trying to be careful to say, obviously, if you get everybody already into a system, everybody in the world now, and normalize a system in which everybody has to go to the World Government Bureau and re-update my biometric data or whatever, surely that system's going to be used by the Antichrist. Why wouldn't he? Because it's already there. And it might not be. Whatever. But I'm just saying, it probably is a stepping stone. And eventually you've got to be careful with that too, because I said this in the podcast too. If they did this whole thing, let's say they got some antibody test or vaccine and said, you got to get this vaccine. And I had waited out enough time to where I could be sure the vaccine wasn't going to straight up kill me because I'm not too super, happy about vaccines in general. But if I had to do it, I would get it if I could be somewhat sure it's not going to harm me and there was enough time that had passed. In other words, I would do that, and I would even get the digital dollar thing knowing for sure that it wasn't to do with the mark of the beast. However, if they said, hey, put it in your right hand or forehead as well, you get your choice, right hand or forehead. I guess it's if you're amputee or whatever, you can put it in your forehead. But then I guess the idea is I would say, okay, it doesn't have the other elements. It might have the 666. Who knows? Again, you can put that on anything. But the Antichrist isn't instituting it. It's not. There isn't. This isn't associated with the Antichrist. I think that's the big thing that to really realize about the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is a choice to join the Antichrist team unambiguously. It's more to disassociate yourself with the perceived losing team in the concept of this event. It's a marking, and it's an eyes wide open marking, because even you would say, oh, well, these people, all they did was really just say, I wanted to be able to buy or sell or whatever. But think about the choice that you have to make in that moment or whatever, because you can't, let's say you were sort of neutral on the subjects, and you saw, you're not an idiot. You can tell that this guy is killing these people. You can tell that this guy's putting himself up there like a messiah, and he's got utter power. Nobody can make war with him. It's not any good to fight against him. But on the other hand, he's killing all these guys that we used to think were Christians, and some of those weren't so bad of dudes. And I feel like that, they're dying rather well over there. It seems like they believe in something. And then, so you're still making an eyes wide open choice when you say, yeah, go ahead and give it to me. I want to be able to buy or sell, and I don't want you to kill me like those guys. So, yeah.
Yeah, when I heard
think in that moment, you'll know what 666 means, the number of his name, because you'll know his name, and it probably will make more sense than any of this stuff we've been doing since Nero.
Yeah, when I heard you talk about it on your podcast, I was like, the way that I pictured it in my brain was you're putting on the team jersey. You're not joining the team. Like you're just in the stands with the red jersey with the 666 on the back of it. It's like
a little tiny flag.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you got the big foam fingers. You're like, okay, I'll play along. All right, Chris. So let's wind this down. Could you please give out some plugs and stuff, and then we'll call it done for the evening.
Sure. Well, I guess I don't really have anything to plug. The podcast, I guess, Bible Prophecy Talk is where I've been releasing podcasts and such. But that's it. Pretty much Bible Prophecy Talk is the only thing I got to plug.
All right. Is there a site or something to contribute to your Wrath movie?
No, we already got it all funded up. So there's nothing
cool.
to even worry about there.
All right. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed the information that you brought. I just appreciate it. I know that it sucks to take an hour to come in, and talk about this kind of things, but I do appreciate it.
I can't think of a better time. So anytime.
All right, man. Well, thank you very much again, and good luck. Do you have any kind of let's see, like a positive kind of thing to end on. Like, do you think that we are going to see the end times in our lifetime?
I don't know. I wouldn't doubt it. I keep my eye open. I personally watch, in Daniel, it kind of there's an allusion to this king conquering 3 areas of the compass, but one area of the compass isn't mentioned. And, I take that as him probably coming from being the king of the West. It further describes that earlier in another part of Daniel about he subdues 10 kings or subdues 3, basically takes over some 10 king thing by taking over 3 kings first. Anyway, long story short, in the context of that particular place in Daniel, the king of the West was Macedonia or Greece. This is a complete speculation, and I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up anywhere else. But my personal thing that I watch out for is anything coming out of the Balkans, and something that is somebody. Basically, man, the first thing I would expect to see is conquest. Some new thing with warfare is what I expect to see, and some guy heading that up. And once that happens, is my only thing right now. I don't watch. I got my eyes open. I'm open to possibilities, but as far as I read it, that's the first thing that we're all going to see is this guy conquering, and it's that I look for. So not right. Positive, but yeah.
All right, Chris, thank you so much, man. I really did have fun.
All right, John. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Advertise and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Advertise. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Advertise. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Advertise, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.